Right, so now that we know a bit more about conditional access, let's have a look in the Azure portal to configure some policies. So let's browse over to Azure Active Directory. And if we scroll down under security, there will be a tab called Conditional Access. Also remember that you will need an EMS license to access conditional access or to be able to configure conditional access policies. So first off, we have our Policies tab. This is where you define new policies. Under Manage, we have a few settings as well. So for example, we have named locations. This is where you can add a new location's IP address for your organization, which will basically whitelist that IP address or users using that IP address when signing in, so it does not interfere with your risk score, and we will get into risk scores a bit later. We also have custom controls, which is still in preview, where you can create your own custom controls via JSON notation. You also have your terms of use, where you can force users to accept or read your company's disclaimer. So let's say, for example, new terms. And as you can see, you can give it a name, the terms of use document, and you can specify some settings. For example, require users to expand the terms of use, require users to consent on every device, for example, and then you can also attach policy templates. You also have your VPN connectivity and also classic policies with the usual suspects under troubleshooting and support, which is, basic troubleshooting and creating a new support ticket with Microsoft themselves. Our focus today, however, is on policies. So as you can see, there's a baseline policy already created for you, which requires MFA for admins by default. However, this is still in preview. Let's go ahead and create a new policy. So first off, let's define the two main elements we need to configure. First, we have assignments, and secondly, we have access controls. So think of assignments as when something specific happens. So you can configure when something specific happens under assignments is basically a condition. And then once that condition is met, you can configure access controls to make something happen based on the condition you have set. So let's go ahead and create a new policy. Okay, so we're going to create a policy for when there is a medium risk associated to a specific user account. That account needs to be MFA'd when trying to access Exchange Online. So under users and groups, let's select the users. So we have three options. We can include none, which basically means no users, include all the users in our tenant, or we can select selected users and groups. So the best practice is to always select specific users or groups to roll out and then increase the scope as time goes on, just to make sure you don't lock yourself out of Azure Active Directory via policy or you break something on a large scale. And we will include specific users. So let's say specific users, and let's select our main user. Let's click on done, and under cloud apps, this is where we will define to what applications is relevant for the condition. So you can either include or exclude again. However, let's go on to selected apps, and let's go ahead and select Exchange Online. Office 365 Exchange Online, that is correct. And you will see a little notification popping up saying if we select Office 365 Exchange, it will also affect other apps such as OneDrive and Teams, which is fine for now. And let's go ahead and done. And now we're going to configure the conditions. So you can choose any of these conditions that either needs to be met. It's either all of them or some of them. So let's start with sign-in risk. So the sign-in risk is basically determined by Azure in the backend to determine how risky is the sign-in of a specific users. So for this example, we said we will enable MFA or prompt MFA for medium risk users. So let's select medium. We also have device platforms where we can select specific platforms like Android and iOS. However, let's leave it by default. So any user that has a medium risk should be prompted with an MFA prompt. We also have locations and client apps as well as device state. So we are not going to configure any of those options for now. So let's head over to access controls. So here we can select, should we either grant access or block access. So by default it says grant access, and we're going to check require multi-factor authentication when the above criteria is met. So for example, when any user signs in to Exchange Online which has a medium risk. And here you can say for multiple controls require all the selected controls, or we're going to say require one of the selected controls because we only configured one. So let's head over to session controls, and here we have an option to select between app enforced restrictions or conditional access app control. So for this example, we're going to use app enforced restrictions. So we're going to let the application itself limit the restriction. So let's go ahead and select that. We're going to enable the policy and go on and create it. We can now see that MFA for medium risk users are enabled, unlike the base policy which is not enabled by default. You will also see right next to a new policy there's a what if. So the what if setting can be used to test how a policy would react on specific users. So let's go ahead and click on what if, and here we can test the impact of the conditional access for a specific user or groups. So let's go ahead and click on users, and we selected our first user which is blurred out at the moment, and let's go ahead and limit it to Exchange Online, our application. Let's click on done, and here we can select the IP address or even the country, the device platform, the client app, the device state, and the sign-in risk. So if you recall, we only configured the sign-in risk. So let's go ahead and see what happens if we click on what if with the settings as it is. So what it will do, it will automatically detect a high risk because none of these settings are selected. So, and then as you will see, require multi-factor authentication for that specific user when they try to sign in to Exchange Online. However, if we go ahead into the sign-in risk and let's go to low risk and click on what if, it should return no policies, as you can see, because there's no policies that are applied because there is no condition that is met. So let's go ahead and close this tab, and let's create another policy quick. So let's call this block high risk users for Exchange Online, and we're going to do the same settings, almost identical. However, this time we want whenever a user is detected as high risk, it should not allow that user to log into Exchange Online from any device. So let's go to users and groups. Let's go to select users and groups, and users and groups again, and let's choose our first victim again. Under cloud apps, we're going to configure Exchange Online again. Let's select that, and let's configure the condition. So the condition here is, so we configure it as yes, and we're going to configure this as high. We're going to leave the device platforms and the other conditions as is, and let's go to access controls. And what we want to do is we want to block access if one of the selected controls are met, because they were only configured one condition. So let's go ahead and click OK. And under the session, we're going to use app enforced restrictions again, and enable this policy and click create. So as you can see, that was quite quick to create this policy. And once again, if we want to test this policy, we go to the what if tab, we select our user, we go to our cloud apps, and we're going to select Exchange Online again. There we go. And let's say under the sign-in risk, we're going to say medium, or let's say rather low. And if we click on what if, there should be no policy associated, which is correct. And if we go to high instead of low for the sign-in risk and click on what if, it should say block access, because that is the policy we've just created. And that's how we know what will be the impact for specific users or groups regarding conditional access.